Freedom Radio Hour. Live on Capital Radio 91.6 FM.
All right, everybody. Welcome to another edition of the Freedom Radio Hour. I'm your host, DJ Adam Cruz, and we're live and direct right here on Capital Radio 91.6 FM, the heartbeat of Sudan, and on the web at freedomradiohour.com. Thank you so much for taking the time to tune into the show. Thank you for liking, sharing, and commenting on everything we're putting out, including on our podcast, on our website at freedomradiohour.com. Thank you for downloading our free app. Search us out. All right, let's jump right ahead and give you that number one business news and trends from around the globe. All right, so, I talk often in prior episodes about the Blurred Lines case. In 2015, Robin Thicke Pharrell Williams released Blurred Lines, had a lawsuit that the judges decided that you could sue for inspiration, the vibe of a song. We're not talking about copyright infringement, the good old-fashioned kind, meaning usually copyright is protecting lyrics and melody. But in the case of Blurred Lines, it really opened up the floodgates for lawsuits around vibe, around tempo or rhythm, the feeling that you get in a song that might be similar to something else. So this is a big issue because now when you consider Blurred Lines and what's come after, you realize how impactful these lawsuits are. But what's interesting is when I did a bit of digging around these cases, there's a lot of focus on the Blurred Lines case, but I think there is actually a case that comes before that really spoke to the beginning of this issue. What issue is that? That we're going beyond lyrics and melody in terms of copyright protection. Now we're into inspiration and vibe, which is really muddying the waters and making it very difficult for people to create without feeling afraid of infringing on copyright accidentally. Let me explain a little more. So let's go back. In 1976, you had the former Beatle, George Harrison. He was in a lawsuit around a song that he wrote that another artist claimed he stole. And so now what you see in this is a very, very beginnings of what we now know from the Blurred Lines case, which is suing for vibe or inspiration. In this particular case, the judges ruled against George Harrison, and they accused him of what's called, quote, subconscious plagiarism. Like, what is that, right? Subconscious plagiarism. That's essentially starting the tear in this argument that we have years later around Blurred Lines, which is you could sue now for that vibe, that feeling, that inspiration, right? So since then, we have the Katy Perry case, Ed Sheeran cases, Led Zeppelin, many things that we've talked about on this show that are around this very problem that's been focused on the decision that came from that Blurred Lines case. So in a prior episode, I said, what do people do about this problem now? Do you stop creating? Well, some of the research suggests that what individuals are doing, at least on the higher end, meaning high-end artists or record labels, they're essentially sending their material to musicologists before they put it out. So there's a great piece in Rolling Stone that I think you guys should check out, and I'll post the link on our website. And it basically focuses on one musicologist, a forensic musicologist. Her name is Sandra Wilbur, and she talks about how she's now receiving 3 times the amount of requests than before from record labels and high-end artists, attorneys, musicians, various folks that want her services. And what does she do? She combs through the material to make sure that there isn't a possible lawsuit in the future. Can you imagine? So what she's doing is using her musicology background and her expertise to comb through the material. But that's for a high-end artist. So you and I, when I talked about this before, I said, and I still feel this way, that independent artists like you and I are basically left to the lion's den, to the lions around this problem, because we can't afford the high price that comes with hiring a musicologist, which will be thousands of dollars. So there's more that comes out of this problem. So yes, if you had the means, you could hire a musicologist like Sandra Wilbur. Okay. The other thing you can do is purchase insurance. Insurance is now seeing a spike in the requests for what's called E&O insurance, errors and omissions. Can you imagine? So a lawsuit basically covers artists millions of dollars depending on the earning potential, how popular the artist is, and also whether they've had other legal run-ins. Someone could purchase a policy for thousands of dollars or upwards of $250,000 a year. And basically it covers you in cases around intellectual property against an artist. So that is another way that artists are looking to cover themselves. They're purchasing insurance. But again, that, like I said, is thousands of dollars. And when I go back to the independent musician, we don't even have that to pay. So what do? Are we still left to the lions? Perhaps. Well, the other thing I discovered was there are two individuals, a musician and a lawyer, Noah Rubin and Damien Rell. Those two individuals have come together. And you think, okay, what are they working on? An app of some sort? Not exactly. Let's take a break. When we come back on the Freedom Radio Hour, I'll talk about what this musician and this lawyer teamed up to do and how it might be able to help independent artists like you and I from dealing with this issue around inspiration and possible lawsuits. Come and join us right here on Capital Radio 91.6 FM and on the web at freedomradiohour.com.
From author and music industry leader Adam Cruz, check out the new book, Free the Music Business, Tips and Tales from an Indie Music Nerd. Available now on paperback, Kindle, audiobook and soundtrack, courtesy of Mixtape Sessions.
Freedom Radio Hour. Live on Capital Radio 91.6 FM.
And we're live on Capital Radio 91.6 FM and on the web at freedomradiohour.com. I'm your host, DJ Adam Cruz, and you're tuned in to the Freedom Radio Hour, your number one source for music business news and trends from around the globe. All right, let's jump right back to it. During the previous segment, we were talking about issues relating to the copyright law as it exists today. Usually, copyright protects lyrics and melody, but these days, all of that's become weird and foggy and muddy. Why? Because you have cases like Blurred Lines, and even before that, you had a George Harrison case in 1976 that I argue kind of started that tear in this issue around copyright law, like I was describing. What's the issue? Well, now you're getting a huge amount of lawsuits that are coming in, suing artists and record labels for copyright infringement. Why? Because they're saying that, well, your song kind of sounds like mine in terms of feel, rhythm, tempo, or vibe. And so that never used to be adjudicatable, if you will. Now it can be around lawsuits like Blurred Lines. Now, because that's been decided, you see more that's come up. Katy Perry, Ed Sheeran, Led Zeppelin, Lizzo, many others are now being sued in various ways around this problem of inspiration or copyright infringement, okay? So we were talking in a previous segment about high-end artists that are able to purchase or hire musicologists. Sort of middle-tier artists are able to purchase insurance called E&O insurance. That's errors and omissions. What does that do? That protects you from any claims around intellectual property. Okay, so we have that. But what if you or I, the independent artist, still can't even afford that? Because that is thousands of dollars a year. So what do? Well, there's a musician and a lawyer that might be able to help us. Noah Rubin and Damien Rell. These two individuals are not working on an app. They worked on an algorithm. What they did was they basically developed an algorithm that was able to generate 300,000 melodies a second. Can you imagine? Let me say that again. So they developed an algorithm that's able to generate 300,000 melodies a second, and it created a catalog of 68 billion 8-note melodies. What they then did is took those 68 billion 8-note melody, if you think about it in sets, right? 300,000 melodies into 68 billion 8-note sets, right? What they did was they copyrighted that. Then they released that into the public domain. So what is this hoop jump about? Well, they're hoping that by doing this very exercise, that it would allow artists more freedom to create music without fear of a lawsuit. Why? Because if we're essentially saying that the two things that protect you from copyright are not really standing that well, meaning usually copyright is protected by lyrics and melody. But if that's not the case anymore, perhaps if these sets of melodies, these 8-note melodies, were put into the public domain, it would stand to reason that any person that creates something would fall into one of those sets, and that set would be in the public domain, which means you're free from litigation at that point. So I think the really ingenious way that might protect us, independent artists who can't afford E&O insurance, can't afford to hire musicologists, but want to still be protected from their work. What we're talking about now is not simple. It's very complicated. But the interesting thing about these two individuals is that they figured out a way to simplify this very complicated thing, because when you do think about it, like I said in a previous episode, we are talking about 88 keys in the piano, in this case 68 billion 8-note melodies according to these two, right? And if you take all of that and you put it into the public domain, you're essentially freeing us artists from copyright claims, because we're able to use those tools to be able to create something brand new. And I think that's very telling, because when you think about it, nothing is new anymore. The notion that someone's creating something original from the top of the head is not really happening. Why? Because if you're engaging yourself in music in any sort of way, it stands to reason, and it's only natural, that you're going to come across an overlap in music and sounds, because you're influenced by everything around you. I think it's silly that we've gone to this point, but I think there might be very smart people in the world, including Noah and Damien, that will be able to figure this out for us, and perhaps these algorithms will be able to free us up from copyright claims. I love how this is talking about that. I want to take another break, but when we come back, let's break down what's been going on with music business news and trends, like the CRB, the Copyright Royalty Board. They're trying to raise rates here. I'll explain what that means. And also we need to talk about what's going on with Spotify and a kind of program that some are arguing is a modern day payola. I'll explain what I mean when we come back right here on the Freedom Radio Hour, your number one source for music business news and trends from around the globe.
From author and music industry leader Adam Cruz, check out the new book, Free the Music Business, Tips and Tales from an Indie Music Nerd, available now on paperback, Kindle, audiobook and soundtrack, courtesy of Mixtape Sessions.
Freedom Radio Hour.
And we're back live on Capital Radio 91.6 FM, the heartbeat of Sudan, and on the web at freedomradiohour.com. You're deep in the zone right here on the Freedom Radio Hour, your number one source for music business news and trends from around the globe. Thank you in advance so much for liking, sharing, commenting, leaving a review for our podcast. You can check us out on Spotify, on iTunes. Search out Freedom Radio Hour. All right, let's jump back in. I promised you some updates on the Copyright Royalty Board and more. So here we go. So last year, the CRB really proposed a 44% increase to songwriters and publishers in terms of mechanical royalties. Let me say that again. The Copyright Royalty Board is trying to increase the mechanical royalties that are paid to songwriters and publishers. They're trying to increase it by 44%. That's a lot. They're hoping to do it incrementally, in little baby steps, until 2022, when they will reach that increase, that mark of 44%. So who is going to pay that? DSPs, those are digital service providers. Fancy way of saying Google, Amazon, Spotify's of the world. And with the exception of Apple, all of them appealed the decision of the CRB. Let me give you a little background though. Let's go a little back in time. These same DSPs were in favor of the passage of the Music Modernization Act, but they were in favor of it in order to gain immunity from being sued by publishers and songwriters for not properly licensing or not properly paying the right fees. So when you think about it, it behooves them to gain this immunity, because when you start to switch up the rates and you make this passage into law, I'm talking about the Music Modernization Act, they knew they were going to have to change up the way they paid, and they were going to have to pay more. So they were trying to gain immunity from doing that. So they got that immunity, the MMA passed, and then they appealed the decision from the CRB. But you should know a couple of things. One, even though this is a bit of a dirty trick, and it is, CRB cases are notoriously really hard to overturn. So what hopefully will happen is that these DSPs will be required to start to cough up this 44% increase to songwriters and publishers. So that's a good look for us, but you're going to see an impact and a shift. The more that you pay out to the artists, the more these companies find it harder to sustain themselves. So I wouldn't be surprised if you start to see perhaps some of these streaming outfits start to either minimize their efforts or close their doors, or some other switch that reduces the pressure around what they're paying out to songwriters and publishers. Moving on from that, it's really important that we talk about the Spotify Marquee program. What is that? Spotify announced that they have this interesting ad platform that they're inviting artists like you and I to take advantage of. So if you have your material on Spotify like I do, they have a program that you could buy into that would essentially highlight your release, your material, your artistry to their platform. They're calling it the Spotify Marquee program. It charges artists 55 cents per play and a $5,000 minimum payment in order for them to essentially bump up your material and push it to over 9 million users initially. So how did this work out for, say, a bigger name artist? Let's dive in. You have a Puerto Rican singer, Bad Bunny, known for his reggaeton hits, etc. He used and bought into the Spotify Marquee program. By doing that, his latest album enjoyed 80 million streams from those 9 million users, and it helped him to further catapult his efforts around touring and merch. So it all kind of worked together to his benefit, as sort of a calling card or a business card, a foray into the big moneymaker, which is touring, merch, etc. But it also opens the doors to a big problem, because as you can imagine, we got to go back to, like we did before with the George Harrison case in a previous segment. Let's go back to the 70s. When you think about Payola is essentially the same thing that we're seeing around this Spotify Marquee program, some argue, and I kind of agree. What do I mean? Well, back then, and even today, radio stations were inundated with Payola scams, where you would have power brokers, promoters, etc., basically using their muscle to gain radio play for their artists that they're representing. What does using their muscle mean? Perhaps they were bribing radio hosts or radio programming directors, etc. Perhaps they were using gifts and other entry VIP programming, etc., to really entice radio stations to play their clients' material. That has since been outlawed, but you and I know that that continues on radio stations all around the globe in a different way. Today, though, with the advent of digital music in particular, you have streaming music, which is 80% here in the States of how people are consuming their music today. You have the Spotify Marquee program that is there to take your money. 55 cents a play and $5,000 will get you that top tier attention, that spotlight on your music. I think this is digital payola, but Spotify, of course, disagrees. They think that this will allow an opportunity for more independent artists to move forward, to gain that exposure that usually was reserved for the Beyonce, Taylor Swifts of the world, etc. But I find it to be very interesting that you see the very place where you can get access to your music, Spotify, is also selling back ad space to its artists. I just think that reeks of corruption, that reeks of a problem and an imbalance in the artist relationship as it pertains to DSPs like Spotify. I think this spells trouble, but I think you're going to see more of the top tier artists take advantage of it, and they're going to see the benefit, whereas we on the independent side will seldom use that service because it's pricey, and does it guarantee us the play that we'll need? I guess time will tell. I'll keep you posted if I learn of anything more right here on the Freedom Radio Hour. That's all the time we have. Make it your business to check out our website at freedomradiohour.com. Thank you to our broadcasting partner at Capital Radio 91.6 FM. Have a great weekend and a great week ahead. I'll see you next time. Oh, and a very big shout out, Johnny D and the Johnny D Experience. Mad shout out to you, my man. Have a great weekend and a great week ahead. I'll see you next time. Peace.